Yes, it is. Okay, we are going to start again at the beginning of Parakaf Dalid, chapter 24. We read through part of it already, but I'm going to start it again to go to a little bit more in depth. So, you remember that the king right now is Yehoiakim, whose name was originally Eliakim, and when they were invaded, the king was named. The king's name was changed to Yehoiakim. But Yehoiakim and Eliakim are the same person. Not to make matters too more convoluted, is that the next king's name is Yehoiachin, but we'll get to that when we get to that. So, Aleph, number one, Biyamav Allah Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel. At that time, when Yehoiakim was the king, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Bavel, came to Israel. Vahi lo Yehoiakim Eved Shalosh Shanim. So for the first 3 years that Nebuchadnezzar was there in Israel, Yehoiakim was subservient to him. Vayashav Vayimrod bo. And then he went ahead and he rebelled against the king. Now, according to one opinion, the rebellion was simple enough in that all they did was they closed the main gate to the city and didn't allow the king to come in, which itself is, now as we picture rebellion very often as an uprising, an armed uprising, some kind of revolt, like the Bar Kokhba revolt, for example. This was nothing like that at all. Apparently, it was something that was a slap in the face to the king, and therefore he was seeing that as a revolt. What happens? Remember that from the time of Menashe, it's already going downhill for the most part for the Jews, even though we had a really good king in there for a bit. Nevertheless, the Gzerah and the die was cast for something to happen. And because the die was cast, good morning, Danny, we are in Parakaf Dalid, Pasuk. We're about to do Pasuk Bet. And because the die was cast, not only does Hashem allow Nebuchadnezzar to come in and terrorize Israel, it goes even further. Pasuk Bet. Vayishalach Hashem bo et gedudei kasdim, et gedudei Aram. I'm getting feedback just a second. There's mute. Et gedudei Aram, et gedudei Moav, et gedudei Bnei Ammon. So all these different garrisons of other countries are coming in against Israel. Vayishalachem bihuda laha'avido. And they were sent to Judea, to what we would call Yehuda, to destroy it. Kidvar Hashem, asher diber biyad avadav hanaviim, like Hashem had already said. So the implication seems to be that these countries, the only reason they came is because Hashem put it into their mind to do it, to fulfill his command or his gzerah. So let's take a look at one slide, which is the Radak. And he says as follows about these Gedudim. It says, Et Gedudei Aram, et Gedudei Moav v'chulei. Kulam ba'u b'shlichut Nebuchadnezzar harasha. All these countries, these garrisons came they were sent by Nebuchadnezzar. Shenatan Hashem b'libam lavo. Hashem placed into their hearts that they should come, laha'avido, to destroy it, lefisha asara b'nei Hashem, because they did evil in the eyes of God. V'zeu shamar, and this is what it means when it says, vayishalach Hashem bo. V'lo hava el yitbarach la'arich lo od lefi chachamar vayishalach Hashem bo. Because look at the beginning of Pasuk, look back now at the beginning. It doesn't say vayavo or alu that these gedudim came, it says vayishalach Hashem. Hashem himself sent these people. What does it mean? He didn't call them up. He put them into their mind, into the leaders' minds, that they need to go out and attack Israel, and specifically Yehuda. Let's take a look at next Pasuk, Pasuk Gimel. Ach al pi Hashem hayta bihuda. This evil that came through these gedudim, through these garrisons of soldiers that came. The goal was from Hashem to remove the Jews from before the face of God due to the sins of Menashe. Remember, Menashe, although he did tshuva at the end of his life, and we discussed this a long time ago, nevertheless, as a result of his averot, it brought about this evil. Now, I think it's important to note that, and I talked about this yesterday, I give a Mesilat Yesharim class on Wednesday mornings. Mark is there. It's important to understand that when we do something, as an individual that our actions, positive or negative, have ramifications beyond ourselves. It's not just what we do that could potentially help somebody else or hurt somebody else, but at the same time, we have to be very, and therefore at the same, we have to be very careful with our actions. However, when the higher up you are on the food chain, and this time we're talking the highest level in the Judaic hierarchy as far as politics, we're talking about the king. Ad kedei kach, that a king is not allowed to be mochel his kavod, which means if a king were to walk in the room and I were to stand up, he can't tell me it's okay, sit. He's not allowed to do that. He cannot overlook his kavod. So therefore, all of his actions, and because the Jews themselves, we saw in the time of Nashe, followed and went along and no one tried to stop, most people didn't try to stop it. Therefore, the result was this Gzeirah came out, and now we're seeing this Gzeirah, or this edict from Hashem, that the destruction of Bnei Yisrael, or at least the attack on Yehuda, was coming to fruition. And it wasn't just that Nebuchadnezzar came, but also his other little side countries were following along in their footsteps. I want to see, I think, sorry, I took this off screen share too fast. Just a second, sorry. Okay, take a look at this slide, please. This is the Dat Sofrim now on the same pasuk, which is pasuk bet. Zot lo hayta milchama sdira. It says that, look, all these different garrisons and phalanxes of armies came. It says this wasn't an organized war. But more it was what we would call nowadays guerrilla tactics. They just kind of, in different hotspots, would come and attack the Jews. Ke'onesh Eloki, as a godly punishment. Shoridet pachad Yisrael me'al hagoyim, vehem he'izu lishdod otam le'or hayom. Not only were they able to attack the Jews, they even did it in broad daylight. Ulam, Yehoyakim piresh et hadvarim acheret. When Yehoyakim, the king, looked at what happened, he interpreted things differently. Sh'al Yisrael hitchazek b'choach ulhitnaged lechol matkif af gadol. He said, no, we know, he didn't see this as a punishment. He said, oh, you know what? We need to bolster our army. We need to strengthen ourselves and to go against any attack, no matter how great. And if we do this against the strong guys, then the little guys are not going to come and attack us. He very strongly opposed and fought, not physically, although that's not true, it was physical, against the prophets. The prophets told him, among them Yirmiyahu, listen, dude, you're not going to survive this. He didn't pay attention. You see, he quotes the Sefer Yirmiyahu. It's not quoted here in Sefer Melachim. That the king went ahead, Yehoyakim, and even killed one of the Nevi'im named Uriah from Kiryat Yarim, who gave prophecy that Malchut Yehuda was about to fall. He even wanted to kill Yirmiyahu, which he didn't. He said Kasdim. Now, it's a side comment he makes here. You'll notice the list of the countries that came against us were Kasdim, Aram, Moab, Ammon. So what's this Kasdim? Kasdim ayashem lechelek mitzvah melech Bavel. We're not talking here about Ur Kasdim, like we're the birthplace of Avram Avinu. Rather, we're talking about Kasdim, which was the name of one of the divisions of the Babylonian army. Shayu achzarim biyoter. They were exceedingly cruel. Masoret umesurim biyoter leNebuchadnezzar shaya ben mekomam, and they were very much given over, meaning they were very devoted to Nebuchadnezzar, who was one of their own.
Sounds like Saddam Hussein.
It's exactly what it sounds like. Exactly what it sounds like. Beratzon en kol chadash tachat hashamesh. Beratzon nitzarfu alehem kol sonei Yisrael miben shchenei Yisrael shetamid zipu le'edam. So again, except before, I already said this before, that the other surrounding countries on their own will, meaning now Hashem put it into their minds, we saw, to come against us. If you looked at it from a geopolitical perspective, from a military perspective, there was no reason for these countries to attack us. It was only Gzeirah from Hashem that this should happen. Lavido ki dvar Hashem, elu hayu yisurei ibud v'lo yisurei hitorut l'tshuva. But that Sofrim is telling us that these yisurim that the Bnei Yisrael are going through this tough time was not to encourage the Jews any longer to do tshuva, but rather it was to cause their downfall. Because Hashem already many times put them through yisurim, put them through tough times in order to encourage them to do tshuva, and it didn't do any good. Higiu ma'imad nafesh. It's the end of the game. So talk about that for a minute. We look back at Paro Melech Mitzrayim. I'm talking about the original recipe, Yul Brynner, in Sefer Shemot. And it says Hashem hardened his heart, Hashem hardened his heart. And you think like it sounds like Hashem took away his free choice. Like, what do you mean? He was forced to do this. So I heard many years, maybe even the first year I lived here, I heard Rav Aviner say, in the name of, I think it was the Vilna Gaon, that Dafka, by hardening his heart, Hashem gave Paro free choice. How? Because if Paro kept being the recipient of these plagues, and he sends the Jews out because he's being punched in the face over and over and over, then it's not his free will that's sending them out. It's he's being forced into it. But when Paro's heart is hardened by God, and he says, okay, that's meaning it doesn't have the Makkah did not have any effect on him. Now he's being given back his free choice. I'm either going to let them go or not, but it won't be as a result of these Makkot. But then it got to a point where he did lose his free choice. No longer was Hashem going to stand for it. And at some point he does lose his free choice. You think like, but you just said he didn't lose his free choice. So if you let's take an example of cocaine. Let's see how I'm going to connect this. I have never even had the desire to try drugs. I could have very easily in my life, many times, if I want to get a hold of drugs, taken something. Never had the desire. But let's assume for a moment I break down and said, today I'm going to try and have something. So if I decide I want to have it again, after I've done it once, and maybe cocaine is not a good example because it is extremely addictive. Let's take marijuana. Also, I've never smoked marijuana. But let's assume for a moment I smoke a marijuana cigarette. The way that addiction works for marijuana is not the same level as it is for cocaine. So if I decide I want another cigarette, fine. I could also decide I don't. But once I'm hooked on it or anything else, it is almost no longer my free choice. It has become built into my brain, literally, scientifically, it has become in my, there are receptors in the brain that now require this, and I no longer have free choice. I have to do this until I take matters in my own hands, somehow, usually an external reason, and it causes me to change. Here, we're saying that the free choice of the Jewish people to do tshuva is gone. It's past the time. They've run out of time because Hashem has already given them time and chance after chance after chance, and no longer are they able. So now when he gives them the punishments, these are no longer there to push them into a state of tshuva, but rather it's there to do that, to just cause the beginning of the downfall of Yerushalayim and then eventually the Beit HaMikdash. Aryeh, you were going to say something?
No, just give me the word. Okay, nothing.
Thank you very much. My nose itches this morning. So, next pasuk. It wasn't just the chataot, the chataim, the sins of Menashe, of idolatry, but it goes beyond that. Pasuk Daled number 4. The gam dam hanakia shafach, also the innocent blood that he spilled. Vayimalei at Yerushalayim dam naki, and the city of Yerushalayim is filled with innocent blood. V'lo ava Hashem lisloach. Hashem did not permit this to be forgiven. You'll notice there's something unusual in the pasuk, and that is that the word dam naki is there twice. We don't hopefully have that short a memory that in the first half of the pasuk he mentions dam naki, which is innocent blood, and the second half of the pasuk, 2 words later, he says it again. Take a look at the dot sofrim on your screen. Pa'amayin niskara mila naki v'pasuk zeh. The word naki, or literally is naki, we know it means clean, but in this case it means clean from any sin. But it's mentioned here twice. Kamur la'el chazar Menashe b'tshuva. As we said earlier, and I mentioned also, Menashe did tshuva. Al chataim shemen adam lemakom hayta efsharut she'atshuva to'il. On averot between Hashem and man. In this case, he means for the majority having to do with avodah zarah. Tshuva works. But the fact that he murdered people who were completely innocent from sin, meaning the sin that would have required their death, at this point, this time could not be forgiven. Because kapara for the sin of murder, he tamid kasha yoter me'asher kapara al chataim acherim. The kapara for murder is always much more difficult to do or to receive rather than kapara or atonement for other sins. Not only were the people filled with avodah zarah, but they also not only was the king, meaning Menashe back when, was he also in the process of murdering innocent people, but evidently became part of the daily lives. Remember, we said back when that the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed for three reasons: Gilui Arayot, Shvichut Damim, and Avodah Zarah. We've talked about Avodah Zarah, and we're hearing now more about Gilui of Shvichut Damim, which is murder. Hayta sakana shebe'atid od tiyena hitpartsuyot kashot yoter im hamamlacha ta'amod. There's one more word. I have to tell you what that word is in the next column. Hold on. There's just like one more word I cut off. Ta'amod al tila. So if there's the problem was that the concern would be that because murder was so ingrained in the people, that it would get even worse if this particular kingdom would survive. Now, I'm going to take a detour here because of this particular statement. And I'm going to give you a 5-minute Dvar Torah, which is mat'im for Elul, but is, even though we're not in Elul yet, we're just in Tammuz, but it's good to hear any time of the year. And it's exactly has to do with this statement he just made. We know that there's a mitzvah in the Torah to establish what are called arei miklat. If someone kills somebody by accident, not nowadays, but the time of Beit HaMikdash, that there were cities of refuge, 3 main ones in Ever HaYarden, I'm pointing to the other side of the Jordan, 3 on the other side of the Jordan, and 3 were in Israel proper. These cities of the Leviim also counted, but they had to set up 6 cities. Moshe Rabbeinu did 3 of them in Ever HaYarden, and then when the Am Yisrael came over, Yoshua and the Am Yisrael established the other 3, and then made all 6 became active. And what did that mean? That if someone killed an individual by accident, they would run to a city of refuge. Purpose being is that when an individual killed someone by accident, the next of kin of the murdered the one who was killed has the right to kill the accidental murderer. And therefore, to protect him, he's allowed to go to Ir Miklat, and he's not the next of kin is not allowed to enter the Miklat, into the city of refuge. There are all kinds of mitzvot and halachot that have to do with those particular cities. And the halacha is, it says in the Torah, tachin lecha haderech. You have to prepare the way. What did that mean? There were signs all over Israel that said miklat, just like today, but for different reasons. They had signs around the country that if someone, God forbid, had killed somebody by accident, they didn't have to stop and ask. They could go straight. They could see the signs and go right to an Ir Miklat, and they were safe. There's another time where Jews have to go to a specific place, and that is when they would bring bikurim. Beginning of Parshat Ki Tavo, we read about the mitzvah bikurim. When someone had any of the 7 species, the shebaminim in his field, so the first fruits, they would tie a red string around it. They would say these are the first fruits, and then when they were ripe, they would put them in a basket. There would be this whole procession that would go to Yerushalayim, and then they would go up all together, starting from approximately Motzah, which many of you are familiar with as you come back from Tel Aviv area. You hit Motzah. From there, they would start heading up in a big procession to Yerushalayim. But there were no signs that were required by the Torah for Yerushalayim. It doesn't say tachin lecha derech. Tachin lecha derech, it says by the accidental murderer, you have to put the signs that say miklat. But for a person going through the mitzvah of bikurim, no signs. I mean, they may have put, but there was no mitzvah. There was no chiyuv, no tzivui, no command to do that. The question is why? So an answer is that, actually, first let's add another question. The Gemara asks, why is it that in Ever HaYarden, where there are only 2.5 tribes, there are 3 Arei Miklat, and in Israel, where the rest of Am Yisrael, the majority of people, there's also 3. Why is it even? Why not just 1? Maybe 2, but why 3? Why is it even? So they say that in that area, shchichei rotzchim, murder was common. And therefore, since murder was common, it would be a reason to have 3 Arei Miklat. But the problem is that doesn't answer the question. Because murder, for actual retzach, for murder, you don't go to the Arei Miklat. So what does the Gemara mean? That murder was common and therefore they needed 3 Arei Miklat. It's not for murder. It's for what's it called? Negligent manslaughter.
Isn't it accidental murder? The Torah also calls it rotzeh. It's the same word.
They do.
Whether
I'm talking with right. However, in the Gemara, when it's talking about the question, when it says shchichei rotzchim, it's talking about purposeful murders. It's on purpose. So therefore, it doesn't answer the question. Now, no matter what city you are originally from, whether it's St. Louis or London or New York or Danny, I forgot where you're from originally.
Belfast.
Wherever you're from, or Chicago, if you would listen to the news during the evening and you hear about there was someone who was murdered, you would pretty much assume it's in certain neighborhoods and not in other neighborhoods. Being from Chicago, when unfortunately there's been tremendous amounts of murders there lately, being from Chicago, I can tell you if there's a murder in Chicago, 99% chance it's on the west side or the south side of Chicago and not on the north side, or at least not on the far north side. Extremely rare. Why? Because certain neighborhoods had a certain different level of appreciation of life, and it became part of the DNA of the neighborhood. Because in Ever HaYarden, murder was so common, it also permeated society that life did not have the same value as in other areas. And therefore, that feeling caused that people were not as careful with their actions, such as chopping wood in the forest, which is the classic example in the Torah. And therefore, there were many accidental killings as well. And because of that, they needed more Arei Miklat also in Ever HaYarden. How does that answer the original question now? The original question was, why did they have to put signs to Arei Miklat? They didn't want to put signs for this way to Yerushalayim. The Torah, Hashem, in his Chokhmah, did not want a person who even by accident killed somebody to come into contact with somebody else, say, hey, which way is it the Arei Miklat? He doesn't want to have any contact, to have anything rub off on him, the slightest possibility of influence, that the person should get this feeling that life might not be as critical and important and worth living, and take things a little bit less seriously. And therefore I said, don't even come in contact with people. Go straight to the Arei Miklat. Exact opposite, though, when it comes to bringing Bikurim. Because in that case, when a person was coming from the Galil, or someone was coming from somewhere else in the country, not from around Yerushalayim, who didn't know the area, he starts asking people, which way is it to Yerushalayim? And they would say, what do you need? Why are you going to Yerushalayim? Say, I'm bringing my Bikurim, and that would be the encouragement to people. They do. Hashem wanted that to happen so that they would rub off on them and say, oh, that's right, I have to bring my Bikurim also. Hashem wanted to come in contact with people. So he doesn't want to make it so easy to get to Yerushalayim with signs. So there's no requirement, no tzivui for signs.
Very nice.
We're seeing the same thing I'm talking about now, about how one thing influences another. We just now are reading in here that because retzach, murder, was becoming so common and getting out of control, that it would be potentially get worse as time would go on. You think like, how do people, but it happens. People fall into a certain lifestyle and pattern based on their environment, which is why I came back to what I said at the beginning, depending whatever city you're from originally, when you heard about a murder, or even today, you see news, you see a local news from wherever you come from, you're going to know almost for sure it's in a high crime area based on circumstances. Now, I know that that's painting with very broad strokes, but it is what it is. Back to the text. We're now going to go to Pasuk Hey, number 5. The Yeta Divrei Yehoyakim, the rest of what Yehoyakim did, they did. They're written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Judah. Hayishkav Yehoyakim im avotav, and Yehoyakim died. Vayimloch Yehoyachin beno tachtav. They couldn't have come up with a name that didn't sound exactly like the original one. So Yehoyachin, his son, became king. V'lo hosif od melech Mitzrayim latzet me'artzo. At this point, remember, originally we saw a number of psukim back in the last chapter that the king of Mitzrayim was coming against the Jews. Now it's telling us he's backing off. Ki lakach melech Bavel minachal Mitzrayim ad nahar Prat, because the king of, meaning Nebuchadnezzar, was so strong that he was taking over large swaths of land, including areas that were originally in control of Egypt. Anything that was originally in the hands of the king of Egypt was now in the hands of Bavel, at least in this area. Now, why is that significant? It's not significant for our story, but it is, because that's why it's here. But it's also significant historically. The reason being, when you think of the world powers today, not talking technology, which is Israel, medical technology, startup technology, in every way, shape, or form, Israel is a powerhouse. Talking the military as far as size, as far as land, world powers, you're basically talking United States and Russia.
China.
What's that? China as well. And Micronesia, because they always vote for us in the United Nations. And I think any country has the name micro in the beginning of their name, can't be too big. In any case, Mitzrayim was a powerhouse. Remember, they were why was there a mitzvah for a king, which we'll read in Sefer Devarim? Why was there a mitzvah on the king who was not allowed to go back to Mitzrayim? What would be the draw to go back to Mitzrayim? Is that they were, there was that, and also lo yarbelo susim, he wasn't allowed to have too many horses, but these two mitzvot came together because the source for the best horses in the world at that time of history was Egypt. Egypt was the United States, China, and Russia of its day. And now you're seeing that that's crumbling. This isn't a world history class, but if you look back at that time period of history, things are the shift, the balance of power, the Babylonians, and it's an amazing time period of history. Chet, pasuk 8. Ben shmoneh esrei shana Yehoyachim b'molcho. Yehoyachim, when he became king, was all of 18 years old. U'shlosha chodashim malach b'Yerushalayim. He served for 3 months in Jerusalem. L'shem imo Nechushta bat Elnatan miYerushalayim, and his mother's name was Nechushta. And once again, we see a common pasuk, more or less. You'll see what I mean by that in a minute. Vayas hara b'nei Hashem, he did evil in the eyes of God, k'chol asher asa aviv, all like his father did. Now, almost every single time we've seen a pasuk like that, it says, k'chol asher asa avotav, like his fathers, in plural did, meaning all the people that came before him. So why all of a sudden does it say, k'chol asher asa aviv? So it's telling us, according to Dat Sofrim, I don't have a slide for this, that while he was not the greatest of kings spiritually, he was not like Menashe, he was not like Achaz. He wasn't as bad as them. He was, quote, only as bad as his father. And therefore, the chain of evil continued, but at least it had a little bit of a dip in the procedures of what was going on. Next pasuk, Yud. But
Rabbi,
yes.
Is a question?
Sure.
The point that you made, other psukim said Asher asu avotav and not asa aviv. It sounds like a good question. So I was interested to see if there were any mefarshim, and I pressed the button for mefarshim, and it says Lo nimtzeu mefarshim. No
I'm looking-
Mefarshim on that pasuk.
It's interesting. Well, the Sefaria
How
does
come?
not have does not have that so frame. What he's talking about is he doesn't have anything from the ones that they're in their database. You understand? No, there's no
Right, no
Radak
Rashi,
and-
no Mitzvah David.
Right. Correct. That's right.
Right.
Which, by the way,
Not
when
even
I'm using
English.
Sefaria, which is an unbelievably fantastic site, I find it frustrating
Yeah.
sometimes because there are certain things that I know that someone has to ask. Like this is just an obvious one, and I'm glad that
Right.
it isn't that so frame. Interesting.
But for the Tanakh, I don't use Sefaria. I'm using an application which is just Tanakh and Mefarshim.
Ah, okay. Tov, pasuk Yud. Ba'eta hi alu avdei Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel Yerushalayim. At that time, at the beginning of the reign of Yehoiachin, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Bavel, comes back to Yerushalayim, v'tavo ha'ir b'matzor, and the city is placed in a situation of a siege. You'll notice that it says alu, ayin, lamed, hey, which really spells Allah in singular, and instead we read it as alu in plural. So again, the Dad Sofrim weighs in. Again, no slide for this. He says, I'll just read, it's half a sentence, which is why I didn't make a slide. Ulai mishum shelo haya hatzava gadol. He says, maybe the only reason it says alu in plural, but written it's Allah, is it may not have been a very big army. Why would Nebuchadnezzar not come with a big army?
He didn't need it.
He didn't need it. That's correct.
He
We're
had him
gonna
so proud that, there's nothing to worry about.
Right. We're going to see, I told you this before, when we finish this parak, which may be today, but I don't think so, we're going to see a little film, 7 minutes, from Megalim Institute. Megalim is the educational branch of Ir David. They make videos in Hebrew and in English on site where the stories take place or where the narrative of the Tanakh takes place, and specifically a number of videos having to do with this time period when Nebuchadnezzar comes up through to and including the destruction of Beit HaMikdash. One of them has a few of them have Doron Spielman in them. We won't see that one yet, but we have one from a woman who does a nice little video, but we'll see if we get to it. Next. So Nebuchadnezzar and some of his soldiers come back and they put a siege against the city. Nebuchadnezzar came against the city and his soldiers were oppressing the city. They were causing people problems. So now Yehoiachin, the king, comes out to Nebuchadnezzar, not to do battle, but to basically surrender. Who? V'imo, v'avadav, v'sarav, v'sarisav. He, his mother, his servants, his princes, his eunuchs. And he took, the king took them to Bavel, we'll see, in the 8th year of his reign. Vayotze misham, now you're going to ask, it says that he ruled for 3 months, right?
Right.
It says here he took him in the 8th year of his reign. So this is what's called pronounal ambiguity. How you like those 2 words? What that means in English is I say the following sentence. Steve walked into the bar and saw Mike. He hit him and he fell on the floor. Who? Who hit whom? The pronoun is ambiguous, unclear. So what we're talking about here is the 8th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, not Yehoiachin. So what he does, next, Vayotze misham, Nebuchadnezzar carried away from there at kol otzrot Beit Hashem, all the treasures in the Beit HaMikdash, otzrot Beit HaMelech, and any treasures that were in the house of the king. Vayikatzet et kol klei hazahav, he stripped all the gold off of the gold utensils that were gold plated. Asher asa Shlomo melech Yisrael beichal Hashem, kasher diber Hashem. Again, this is a direct result of the edict of Hashem and the Gzeirah that this is going to happen. All of you, myself included, have been in many, many different types of shuls over the years. In Israel, outside Israel, some are very, very plain, and some are l'shem l'tiferet, and both serve a function. imagine the most beautiful shul you can picture, with all kinds of beautiful artwork, not artwork, but all kinds of design, and just for making the place a beautiful shul. And it's made out of gold, real gold, and real silver. And the people attack the shul. They don't burn it down. They come in and they strip everything off the walls. The ogamat nefesh, the feeling of inner turmoil and pain from seeing the beautiful shul, not yet destroyed, but in the process of taking away the beauty of the shul, the physical, not the spiritual, the physical beauty. Now think about the Beit HaMikdash. We're talking about kelim from the time of Shlomo HaMelech. We are in Melachim Bet, Perek Kaf Daled. You're talking about Melachim Aleph, Perek Zion, and Chet. The Chet is where the inauguration, but Perek Zion is all the building. Is the, if you remember many years ago, that was a difficult Perek to go through because it's basically written for architects. And all that, all the gold is all stripped away. He didn't take yet the kelim. He took the gold off the kelim. We'll see about the kelim at a different point. V'higlad kol Yerushalayim. He exiled all of Jerusalem, vet kol hasarim, and all the princes, vet kol giborei achayil, and all the mighty warriors, aseret alafim goleh, 10,000 that were sent into Galut, v'chol hecharash v'hamasker, and all the smiths and the craftsmen, lo nishar zulat dalat ha'ma'aretz, the lower strata, the lower level of the society. Those are the people that were left behind. This is a similar tactic he's going to use after the destruction of Beit HaMikdash. He leaves a handful of people in the country because there's still a country there. There's still people to work the land. He needs them as servants in the land. Tet Vav. Vayegel et Yehoyachin Bavela. He sent Yehoyachin into Bavel, into Galut. Vet Ema Melech, vet Neshei HaMelech, vet Sarisav, vet Elei Haaretz, Holich Golam Yerushalayim Bavel. So again, he took the wives of the king, the eunuchs, the noblemen, were all taken into Galut from Yerushalayim to Bavel. Vet Kol Anshe Achayil, Shivat Alafim, Echarash, Hamasker Elef, Hakol Giborim Osei Milchama, Vayeviem Melech Bavel Gola Bavela. And he tells us originally 10,000. Now he's telling us 7,000. So if you take a look, if you have Rashi, how many were actually taken into Galut? Rashi and Pasuk Tet Zayin, where it says Shivat Alafim. Ulamalahu Omer Aseret Alafim. Just before he said there were 10,000 soldiers taken into Galut. Now he says 7,000. Baha Katuv Ashlishi Hichriya B'Sefer Yirmiyahu. So a third Pasuk comes along, and we find it in Sefer Yirmiyahu in Perek Nun Bet, where it says, Zeh ha'am asher hegla Nebuchadnezzar bishnat sheva Yehudim 3,000 emor me'ata gimel alafim hayu mishevet Yehuda v'shivat alafim mibinyamin v'shar hashvatim af b'seder olam lamdu ken, meaning Shevet Binyamin v'shar hashvatim. Total was 10,000 people that went into Galut, the soldiers. But we see from this pasuk in Yirmiyahu that 3,000 of the soldiers were from Shevet Yehuda, and 7,000 were from Shevet Binyamin, and other hangers-on from other Shvatim that were still there. Now, what happens here in Israel? You still have people living in Israel. It's not like Nebuchadnezzar is going to stay there and run the country. He's got a huge area of land in this world where he's the king. So what does he do? What he does now, what he did in the last chapter. So the king, meaning Nebuchadnezzar, appointed Matanya, the uncle of the current king, to be the next king of Israel, of Judah. This is where Matanya, most people do not remember because he's only mentioned once, at least in Sefer Melachim, that Tzidkiyahu originally was named Matanya, and he was given this name by the king of Bavel of Tzidkiyahu. So Tzidkiyahu is the next king. And Aryeh, I'm sure you have your list there. You'll tell me next after Tzidkiyahu we have one or two. I don't remember. I think one.
Is it?
What?
Is it?
That's it. That's the last one. Nachon. That's right.
That's zero.
What's that? Zero. Bidiyuk. Nachon. Because Tzidkiyahu is
Zero.
we're going to end Sefer Melachim with Tzidkiyahu going away in chains, and we'll see that. And blind.
Yeah.
So how old was he? Yudchet. Ben 21 shana. He was 21 years old. Tzidkiyahu b'molcho, when he became king. Ve'achat esrei shana malach b'Yerushalayim. And he ruled for 10 years. Sorry, achat esrei shana. He ruled for 11 years in Israel, in Yerushalayim. V'shem imo Chamutal bat Yirmiyahu milivna. Vayas hara b'nei Hashem kechol asher asa Yehoyakim.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is he related to Yirmiyahu?
Was he related to
Different
Yirmiyahu?
yeah.
Sorry?
The Navi was from Anatot, not Livna.
Correct. Yirmiyahu was
Okay.
from our backyard in Anatot. Yes. So this is
Right.
that's why it says Yirmiyahu Melivna. So we shouldn't think it's
Okay.
Yirmiyahu Hanavi.
I got it. Thank
Excellent.
you. I'm sorry.
Great question. Vayas hara b'nei Hashem. What's that?
Fantastic answer. Shows my ignorance.
It's not ignorance.
Okay, fine. Let's go.
But if I ask you what time is it, am I ignorant? If I don't know the time?
If I would have read it, Yirmiyahu Banza, I would have remembered different. Okay, whatever.
Just say
Okay,
there,
let's go.
no problem. Vayas hara b'nei Hashem. He did evil in the eyes of Hashem. Kechol asher asa Yehoyakim. This is similar to the last time when we saw Yehoyakim. He says Kechol asher asa Aviv. Is the same. He tells us he was just like Yehoyakim, his father. Ki al af Hashem hayta b'Yerushalayim u'Yehuda. The anger of God was burning against the city of Yerushalayim in Yehuda. Ad hishlicho otam me'al panav, to the point where he was throwing him off of in front of him. Vayimrod Tzidkiyahu b'melech Bavel. It's kind of a little throwaway here at the end of the pasuk. We'll see next time how it dovetails into this narrative. It says that Tzidkiyahu rebelled against the king of Bavel. What I want to do, let me just get this here on the screen. Let me first have it set up. Go to my, oh, I forgot. Oop. Let me see where I put that link. Here it is. You get it set, and before I play it, I have to share with sound. Okay, 1 second. I have to skip a commercial. Stop the video. Okay, let me do a screen share. Oops. With sound. And we're going to watch a part of this video, if not the whole thing, and explain to you what it is, where to go. Oh, here it is. Okay. Let me explain to you what this is. It is, again, it's done by Migalim Institute, which is the educational arm of Ir David. They have, you go on YouTube and you'll see in Hebrew and in English many, many wonderful videos. And it is going to describe this parak, which we just now finished, and also a little of the next parak into the destruction, because this will help us also see coming attractions, unfortunately, so to speak.
Toward the end of the 7th century BCE, the Babylonian Empire quickly conquers the lands to the west of the Euphrates River, including the kingdom of Judah.
When King Jehoiakim of Judah tries to rebel against Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar quashes the rebellion and exiles the rulers and generals.
Just 10 years later, Jehoiakim's brother Zedekiah, the new king of Judah, rebels again against the Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar is furious. He decides to teach Judah a lesson it will never forget. On the 10th of Tevet, 588 BC,
Which we're going to be the beginning of the next parak, is exactly about Sarah B'Tevet.
he arrives at the walls of Jerusalem with a huge army and besieges the city.
I'm standing by the northern wall of the city. This tower, known as the Israelite Tower, was uncovered by Professor Nachman Avigad in 1970. From the top of the tower, Zedekiah's soldiers watched in fear as hundreds of thousands of Babylonian archers, horsemen, and infantrymen stood before the walls.
From here, they saw the Babylonian engineering corps close in on the city and lay siege to it.
Cut off from the fields outside the walls, The people of Jerusalem now have no source of food. Hunger affects everybody, especially the children. The tongue of the suckling child cleaves to the roof of his mouth for thirst. The young children ask for bread, and no one breaks it for them. Corpses pile up in the streets and disease rages. As the siege drags on, fear and desperation grow. The harvest is past, summer has ended, and we are not saved. The terror reaches its peak when the Babylonian battering rams advance toward the walls and begin to pound them. The noise is deafening. The earth trembles. Soon, the conquering forces will break through the defenses, and the city will be lost. Just at this most critical moment, King Zedekiah decides to abandon the battle. Along with his soldiers, he sneaks through alleys under cover of night and escapes through the southern gate to the Kidron Valley, and then from there to the desert. And it came to pass that when King Zedekiah of Judah and all the men of war saw them, they fled and went out of the city by night by way of the king's garden, by the gate between the two walls, and he went out by way of the plain. Zedekiah can't escape his fate. Soon afterwards, on the plains of Jericho, he is caught by the Babylonians and cruelly punished by Nebuchadnezzar. Meanwhile, the Babylonian army increases its pressure on the northern gate. Right here, near the tower adjacent to the city gate, a fierce battle takes place. Babylonian archers shoot thousands of arrows at the Israelite defenders, providing cover for the Babylonian infantry as they charge the city gate. The Israelite defenders fire back with all their might. Beneath the layer of ash here, Professor Nachman Avigad uncovered arrowhead shot by Babylonian archers, right next to Israelite arrowhead shot by Zedekiah's soldiers in their desperate attempt to repel the enemy. Despite their efforts, the Israelite soldiers, hungry and exhausted, cannot stop the powerful, organized troops spread out before them. On the 9th of Tammuz, 586 BCE, after more than a year and a half under siege, the northern wall is breached, and the Babylonian army bursts into the city. The Babylonian soldiers slaughter the people of the city and wreak destruction everywhere. The cries of pain of the victims, many of them women, children, and the elderly, are heard from every corner. But Jerusalem will suffer its most deadly blow a month later. On the 7th of Av, Nebuzaradan, the Babylonian commander, arrives in Jerusalem and orders it razed to the ground. And in the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. And he burned the house of the Lord and the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem, every great man's house, he burned with fire. Here in the royal compound in the city of David, among buildings that collapsed in the horrific fire, archaeologist Igal Shiloh uncovers a thick layer of black ash. It turns out to be the destruction layer of Jerusalem. The diggers' faces are black with the soot and dirt that covered the ruins from the burnt buildings. Excitedly, the excavators unearthed 2,600-year-old buildings, one after another. They also discovered eating utensils, furniture, and seals, all buried under the ash of the Great Fire. In the sweltering summer of 586 BCE, all of Jerusalem is set ablaze. On the 9th of Av, the temple, the symbol of the spiritual covenant between the Israelites and their God, goes up in flames. From that terrible day until now, the 9th of Av has been a day of intense mourning for the entire Jewish people. Nebuchadnezzar finishes off the destruction with an act that will ensure that Jerusalem will never rebel again. He raises the city walls to their foundations. Now, their heads bowed, the exiles march to Babylon, carrying musical instruments among their meager possessions. But the melody that played in Jerusalem through countless turbulent days is now silenced. In its place arise the hushed tones of the exiles' lament.
By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept as we remembered Zion. On its willows we hung our harps, for there our captors demanded a song of us, and our tormentors demanded mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How can we sing the Lord's song on foreign soil?
So, two things. First of all, you might have said to yourselves when you're listening, that they said, wait, she said they breached the wall on the 9th or the 7th of Tammuz. I thought it was on the 17th, whatever date she gave. We're going to see that next 9th, yes. We're going to see that next week, Bezrat Hashem, why it's that, and why we fast on the 17th. That's first of all. And second of all, in a technical way, once again, I told you the bunch of Sundays that are in a row that are not good for me on Sunday evening, this one coming up again being one of them. I'll let you know next day or so, which maybe I don't know if it'll be Tuesday morning or not again, but I need to do it, again in the morning. This will not become a regular habit. Let me just take a quick look. In theory, next week, Tuesday morning would be the time I would probably want to do this, but I'll send out an organized note just to ask and hold a studio audience. We are poised now to enter the last parak, which we'll start with next time, the last parak of Sefer Melachim, which will be two major tragedies. One is the destruction of Beit HaMikdash, and the second, the murder of Gedaliah ben Achikam, the last Jewish governor of the city of Yerushalayim, which really is the last step of the Malchut Yehudat and the Jews' sovereignty in this country, in the city, and the beginning of the real Galut. And we'll get to all that, Bezrat Hashem, start with at least next week. In the meantime, I hope your day is a little bit more upbeat than this this topic.
That was difficult to watch. Very difficult. To watch.
Trust me, I know. I have taught Sefer Melachim a few times, and when we get to this parak Kaf Dalet and Kaf Hey, it's very difficult to teach, very difficult to read, difficult to watch. So I agree.
But what happened to the Dvar Torah on Elul?
Well, that was it. The whole thing of how you affect somebody else when you come in contact with them, your environment. That was the whole thing, right? That was the Elul one.
Bring Bikurim to Yerushalayim,
right.
or not influencing them if you're a Shotzer B'Shogeg.
Right.
And you use the sign and don't talk to anybody.
Correct. Right.
Okay, I didn't connect that with Elul.
Sorry, I didn't close the loop. So,
right.
Okay. Have a good day, everybody. What's that, Danny?
At least it's the right time of year.
That's correct. That's correct.
Right.
Very good. Be well. Bye-bye.